thick, gray fog rolled in from the Pacific, swallowing Santa Cruz Beach just before dawn. Salt spray drifted in the air, cold and sharp as a blade. Lifeguard Jamie Walker stood at the shoreline, wetsuit zipped to her chin, radio clipped to her shoulder, every sense awake and alert. The storm that hammered the coast all night still whispered in the waves, angry, powerful, restless. The world was all muted grays and blues, nothing but the crash of water and the distant squawk of gulls. Jamie's boots dug into wet sand as she scanned the surf, her breath ghosting out in the chilly morning. The pier was empty, the parking lot behind her scattered with seaweed and broken shells. No swimmers, no tourists, just the battered beauty left behind by the night's chaos. Suddenly, her eyes caught something. Movement far beyond the break, out where the water boiled and foamed white. At first, she thought it was just driftwood, tossed by the tide. But then a thin, frantic shape clung to it, small against the endless water. Jamie's heart stuttered, then raced. Instinct screamed. Someone or something was out there, fighting to survive. Jamie grabbed her radio. "Walker reporting. Possible distress offshore. Initiating rescue," she barked, voice clipped and professional, but her pulse thudded in her ears. She sprinted to the rescue shed, yanked open the door, and swung her leg over the waiting jet ski, barely feeling the cold as she powered it into the surf. Waves slapped the hull, each impact jarring, the engine snarling under her. Spray blinded her, salt stinging her cheeks. Still, she pushed forward, adrenaline cutting through fear. That shape grew clearer. A board, half submerged, spinning in the current, with something alive clutching to its edge. Jamie squeezed the throttle, closing the gap. She shouted into the wind, a warning and a promise. "Hang on! I'm coming!" The thing on the board barely moved, but she saw it now. A puppy, soaked through, ears flattened against its skull, fur plastered tight to thin ribs. Its eyes were wide with terror, paws bloodied from clutching to the splintered wood. The jet ski bucked as Jamie slowed. She reached down, fingers numb, and locked eyes with the tiny dog. It whined, a sound too raw, too desperate. With a practiced move, Jamie scooped the shivering puppy into her arms, feeling its heart race under soaked fur. The animal was icy cold, body limp with exhaustion, but still alive, still fighting. Jamie cradled the puppy against her chest, steering back through the pounding surf, the weight of the storm and the life she'd just pulled from the brink pressing on her chest. The ride felt longer returning, her mind racing. How long had he been out there? Who would abandon a puppy like this? The beach blurred as she hit land, sand spraying beneath the skids. She leapt off, sprinting to the truck with the puppy bundled in her jacket. Inside, heaters blasting, she grabbed a towel and wrapped him up. The dog whimpered softly, tremors racking his small body as Jamie whispered soothing nonsense, her hands gentle and sure. His eyes never left hers, haunted, pleading, but alive. At the animal hospital, everything moved in a blur. Flashing lights, worried voices, the beep of monitors. The vet's face grew grim as she inspected the pup. Rope marks around his neck and legs, severe dehydration, panic response to water. He's traumatized. Badly. Jamie swallowed hard, rage and grief twisting inside her. Someone had tied this dog up, tossed him into the sea, left him to die. She sat beside the kennel as the puppy rested, watching his chest rise and fall, counting each breath. Hours blurred together, the storm outside fading to a cold drizzle. The puppy whimpered in his sleep, legs twitching as if still swimming for his life. Jamie pressed her hand to the glass, helpless and hopeful. No one came for him. No tags, no microchip, no missing posters. He was alone in the world, a survivor with scars inside and out. Jamie felt something inside her shift, something old and aching, a memory of the first rescue that went wrong, the one that haunted her dreams. Maybe that's why she couldn't leave him, why she found herself back at the hospital night after night, sitting cross-legged on the cold tile floor, whispering encouragement to a tiny soul who had every reason to give up, but hadn't. The staff started calling him Zephyr, after the gentle breeze that sometimes comes after a storm, a small, quiet force that signals hope. Jamie smiled at the name. It fit somehow, like a promise that things could change, that pain could give way to healing if someone just cared enough to stay. In those early days, there were no guarantees. Zephyr trembled at every sound, flinched from every touch, eyes darting to the door as if expecting another wave to crash over him. But when Jamie spoke, soft and steady, he listened. When she sang old songs, off-key and quiet, his ears perked up. When she whispered, "It's okay, you're safe now," the shivers slowed, and for a moment, the storm receded. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the sand gold. Inside, hope flickered, fragile, insistent, alive. And in that quiet space, Jamie knew this rescue was only the beginning. The fluorescent lights in the animal hospital flickered softly, casting a pale glow over Zephyr's crate. Jamie stayed even after her shift ended, refusing to leave the little German shepherd puppy alone in that cold, clinical space. She settled onto the floor, knees drawn up, elbows on her thighs, watching every small rise and fall of Zephyr's ribcage. He lay curled, a trembling bundle of fur, the towel swaddling him still damp from the rescue. The vet, Dr. Harlan, approached quietly, chart in hand. "He's stable. We got fluids into him, and his temperature's coming back up, but—" Dr. Harlan trailed off, eyes shadowed with concern. She knelt by the crate, gently pressing her fingers to Zephyr's flank. "See these rope marks?" Her voice lowered. "He's been tied up, probably dragged. There's bruising around the neck and all 4 legs. Whoever did this wanted to make sure he didn't come back." Jamie's jaw tightened. He was fighting for his life out there. He's a survivor. She kept her words even, but a storm raged behind her calm. Every time Zephyr flinched at a distant sound, a gurney rolling down the hall, the faint hiss of water pipes, Jamie's heart ached. How deep did his wounds go? No one showed up to claim the puppy that night. Jamie watched staff come and go, busy with other emergencies, an injured pelican, a cat with a fishhook in its lip. Still, Zephyr's silent suffering drew Jamie back to his side. She talked to him about the ocean, the weather, anything just to keep the connection alive. Sometimes she read aloud from her paperback thriller, not expecting him to understand, just needing him to hear the comfort of a steady voice. The night dragged on. Zephyr drifted in and out of restless sleep, ears twitching, legs paddling as if he were still swimming through dark water. Jamie reached through the bars and brushed her knuckles lightly along his jaw. "You're safe," she whispered, again and again, as if repeating it could make it true. By sunrise, Dr. Harlan approached with paperwork. "No microchip, no owner. He's officially a stray." She hesitated, watching Jamie's tired, determined eyes. "You want to foster him until we find a home? I can't promise he'll bounce back. Sometimes trauma like this, it sticks." Jamie answered without thinking. "I'll take him." She tried to smile, but the words tasted heavy. Responsibility, not charity. She didn't see a victim in that crate. She saw a survivor who needed someone to stay. At home, Jamie prepped the guest bathroom as a makeshift recovery room. She laid out soft towels, placed bowls of water and food within easy reach, dimmed the lights. She carried Zephyr inside, gentle as possible, but he still tensed at the sound of running water, his paws splaying for traction on the tile. Jamie crouched beside him. "It's okay. No more storms here. Just you and me." For the first day, Zephyr barely moved from his corner. He watched Jamie with wary eyes, his body coiled tight, flinching at every noise. The only time he cried was when the neighbor's sprinkler sputtered on, the water pressure hissing like a memory of crashing waves. Jamie sat outside the door, knees pulled to her chest, just listening, feeling her own worries echo in his fear. Meals were a battle. Zephyr refused the food at first, nose wrinkling at the unfamiliar scent. Jamie tried warm broth, shredded chicken, anything to tempt him. She stayed patient, letting him sniff her hand, laying her palm flat on the floor, never pushing too hard. He'd edge closer, then dart back, his trust flickering like a candle in the wind. Nights were hardest. Zephyr whimpered in his sleep, twitching through nightmares that Jamie could only guess at. Once, around 3 a.m., she heard him yelp, a sharp, heartbreaking sound, and rushed in, finding him pressed against the far wall, eyes wide and wild. Jamie didn't try to pick him up. She slid to the floor, curling up near his crate, humming softly. "You're not alone anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again." Days passed in slow, uncertain progress. Jamie worked split shifts at the beach, coming home at every break to check on Zephyr. She brought him little gifts: a squeaky toy shaped like a crab, a fleece blanket that smelled faintly of home. Slowly, Zephyr accepted them, dragging the blanket into his crate, burying his nose in its folds. Jamie celebrated each tiny victory, a wag of his tail when she entered, a single lick of chicken broth, the hesitant way he let her scratch behind his ears. Still, the shadow of water haunted him. When Jamie accidentally knocked over a glass, the sound sent Zephyr scrambling under the table, body shaking. He refused to cross the kitchen if the dishwasher was running, and he froze at the sight of the bathtub, whimpering low in his throat. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in from the ocean, rain pelting the windows, thunder rumbling overhead. Jamie closed every blind, shut off every faucet, and huddled on the bathroom floor with Zephyr curled against her leg. His panic was so complete that he chewed at his own paw, desperate for escape. Jamie just held him, whispering stories about lost dogs who found their way home, about storms that always pass, about new beginnings that sometimes come from the darkest nights. No one ever called to claim Zephyr. Animal control checked lost dog reports, but there was no match. Jamie let herself hope, just a little, that maybe this was fate. Two souls with battered hearts, thrown together by the wild, indifferent sea. By the end of the week, Zephyr would let Jamie sit beside his crate without flinching. Sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd edge closer, watching her with eyes that still held storms, but also now, the first fragile glimmers of trust. For Jamie, the change was subtle but profound. She found herself sleeping better, her old nightmares fading as she focused on Zephyr's healing. Caring for him made her own scars less sharp, less permanent. It was as if, in saving Zephyr, she was learning to save herself. Their journey was just beginning, the road ahead uncertain. But for the first time since the storm, Jamie believed they might find peace. Not in forgetting the past, but in surviving it, together. The gentle jingle of the bell over the shelter's front door marked a new chapter for Zephyr and Jamie. brave shelter sat at the edge of town, a sturdy old building painted with murals of smiling dogs and cats. Its windows caught the morning sun, splashing color onto the cracked sidewalk. Jamie parked her truck outside, Zephyr curled up on the back seat, his blue blanket bunched beneath his chest. He watched the world with wide, cautious eyes, nostrils twitching at the scent of grass and distant sea air. Inside, the lobby bustled with the soft chaos of an animal shelter. Phone ringing, dogs barking, volunteers laughing gently as they swept or filled food bowls. Jamie carried Zephyr in her arms, his body tense but silent, and approached the front desk. Maria, the shelter director, looked up with kind eyes. "You must be Jamie, and this little one is Zephyr?" Her voice was gentle, pitched low, as if she knew how fragile trust could be. Jamie nodded. "He's been through a lot. Needs time and patience." She stroked Zephyr's neck where fur was still thin over his old wounds. Maria led them to a quiet corner kennel, away from the rowdy pups. It was bright, filled with soft bedding and a stuffed seal, and the scent of lavender hung in the air, a trick Maria swore helped nervous dogs relax. Jamie placed Zephyr on the bedding. He froze, ears flat, tail tucked tight. His eyes darted between the unfamiliar faces and the new sounds. Each metallic clang, each excited bark from the next room, every footstep on linoleum. Jamie crouched beside him, resisting the urge to scoop him back up. Instead, she just sat, letting the space between them fill with patience. Maria knelt, careful not to get too close. "We'll take things slow, no pressure. Sometimes they need days before they even eat." She left the kennel door open a crack and backed away, signaling the rest of the staff to give the new arrival space. Jamie pulled out her battered paperback and began to read softly, her voice a quiet thread weaving through Zephyr's new world. Day bled into day, each one marked by tiny, hard-won victories. At first, Zephyr refused to eat unless Jamie was there, her legs folded beside the kennel. The other dogs barked and played, but Zephyr watched in silence, pressed flat against the wall. His nightmares came at random, yelps and whimpers in the deep night, body twitching, claws scraping at the blanket. Shelter staff learned to walk softly past his door, to speak in gentle tones. Jamie visited every day, her routine unwavering. Sometimes she sat and simply read aloud, adventure stories, fairy tales, the daily news, anything for the sound of her steady, gentle voice. Other times she'd bring objects from the outside world, a tennis ball with her scent, an old t-shirt, the blue blanket washed and warm. The crate filled with these small tokens, building a bridge between his old life and this new, safer place. She noticed Zephyr's gaze linger longer each time she visited. At first, he'd edge forward only after she left, nose pressed to the spot where she'd sat. Then, one afternoon, while she sat cross-legged reading, he nosed the blanket towards her, his paws trembling. Jamie smiled softly, careful not to move too quickly. She extended her hand, palm up, letting him sniff. Their first true connection was silent, a hesitant lick at her fingers, a soft sigh as he settled near her shoe. Jamie's heart squeezed. She recognized the haunted look in his eyes. It mirrored her own from another time. Years before, she'd lost a boy during a rescue, waves too high, ropes too slick, hands just out of reach. The guilt had become a shadow she could never quite outrun. Sitting with Zephyr, she felt the edges of that shadow fade, replaced by something softer, sadder, and strangely hopeful. Zephyr's progress was slow, but it was real. He learned to trust the soft pat of Jamie's hand, the brush of her jacket, the low hum of her voice. He'd still flinch at the clang of a dropped food bowl, or the high whine of a vacuum in the hall. But sometimes, when the afternoon sun streamed through the window, he'd doze at her feet, body finally relaxed. The shelter staff grew invested in his recovery. Volunteers took turns sitting near his kennel, reading, humming, or just being present. Some tried to tempt him with treats or toys, but Zephyr preferred the company of quiet and routine. One teenager, Maggie, began leaving drawings taped to his door, sketches of brave dogs with capes, or smiling puppies in sunny fields. Jamie found herself smiling at these, tucking one into her bag as a reminder that even small acts could matter. Jamie brought Zephyr a soft blue blanket one afternoon, letting him sniff and paw at it. The scent of home clung to the fabric, and Zephyr curled up with it, pressing his nose deep into its folds. Jamie watched, her eyes stinging. "You're safe," she whispered, again and again, the mantra as much for her as for him. Sometimes, late at night, Jamie's mind drifted back to her own scars, the ones no one else could see. She remembered the storm, the frantic rescue, the moment she realized not everyone could be saved. In Zephyr, she saw the echo of that pain, the way it lingered, persistent but not unconquerable. If he could learn to trust again, maybe she could too. By the end of that first week, Zephyr surprised everyone. Jamie sat near his kennel, legs stretched out, reading softly. Zephyr inched forward, pausing every few steps until he rested his head on Jamie's shoe. She froze, afraid even a breath might break the fragile spell. But Zephyr just sighed, eyes drifting shut, trusting her completely for the first time. The shelter's embrace was not a cure, but a beginning. Every day brought setbacks and tiny miracles. The world outside was still wild, the storms not entirely gone. But inside those painted walls, hope grew, tentative, fragile, and very much alive. Spring arrived on the coast with cool mornings and sunlight that glimmered through the shelter's front windows. For Zephyr, every day brought new sights, sounds, and challenges. His recovery was never straightforward. Progress came in inch-long steps, each one the result of patience and trust. The storms inside him lingered even as the world outside warmed, but Jamie believed in small victories, and she was there for everyone. The days at Brave Shelter fell into a gentle rhythm. Jamie would come in early, bringing a mug of coffee for Maria and a special treat for Zephyr, a slice of boiled chicken, a soft toy, sometimes just her old ball cap so he could curl up with her scent. She greeted the staff and made her way straight to his kennel. At first, Zephyr would lift his head from the blue blanket and watch her with wary eyes. But slowly, with every visit, that hesitation turned to hope. Jamie's patience was her superpower. She never rushed, never forced Zephyr into the open. She'd sit quietly nearby, reading or humming low, letting the silence stretch until Zephyr decided to cross it. One morning, a gentle rain drummed against the shelter roof. Thunder grumbled in the distance. Zephyr pressed himself into the farthest corner of his kennel, trembling, eyes wide. Jamie slid to the floor, close but not too close, and simply waited. After long minutes, he crawled forward, inch by inch, until his head rested against her knee. Jamie stroked his ear, murmuring quietly, "You're not alone. Not now. Not ever." There were setbacks, always. Zephyr was terrified of rain, even the smallest puddles. If a volunteer walked past with wet boots, Zephyr shrank back, the memory of cold water and dark waves never far away. Maria suggested exposure therapy, tiny steps, first showing Zephyr a bowl of water from a distance, then letting him sniff it, then dipping a paw. Sometimes he'd try, then freeze and scurry back to the blue blanket, breath coming fast. Jamie never showed disappointment. She celebrated each effort, every step toward the unknown. On brighter days, Jamie and Maria took Zephyr out to the shelter's little yard, fenced and lined with wind-blown wildflowers. At first, he hugged the doorframe, only venturing outside if Jamie knelt in the grass ahead of him, calling softly. Eventually, curiosity won over fear, and Zephyr crept out into the sunlight. He flinched at the sound of a sprinkler, but soon he was sniffing dandelions, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath his paws. For Jamie, these slow afternoons in the yard were as healing for her as they were for Zephyr. She found herself opening up to Maria, sitting side by side on the grass, watching Zephyr chase a butterfly for a few precious seconds before retreating again. One afternoon, as a cool wind teased their hair, Jamie confessed, "There are days I wake up feeling like I'm still caught in the surf, still trying to save someone I couldn't reach." Maria just nodded, her gaze soft. "You can't save everyone, Jamie, but you can show them the way back. That matters." Zephyr's progress wasn't linear. Some days he'd curl beside Jamie, eyes closed, trusting, his body finally relaxed. Other days, a dropped bowl or a sharp laugh in the hallway sent him scrambling back to the shadows. Each setback brought an ache of frustration, but also resolve. If Zephyr could try again, so could Jamie. One bright morning, Jamie arrived with a new plan. She brought a shallow baking pan and filled it with an inch of warm water, setting it beside her on the kennel floor. She waited, reading aloud. Zephyr eyed the pan warily, circling it as if it might bite. After what felt like hours, he dipped a single paw in, then yanked it back, shaking water from his toes. Jamie laughed softly, clapping for him. "That's it, buddy, brave boy." Zephyr's tail gave a hesitant wag. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The blue blanket became a symbol for both of them, a safe place, a reminder of every step forward. On stormy days, Jamie wrapped it around Zephyr, letting him burrow beneath it, shielded from thunder and the worst of his memories. Sometimes, when the shelter was quiet, Jamie would lie beside him, head on her arm, letting the silence fill with unspoken understanding. They were both survivors, marked by storms, still learning how to live in the light. One afternoon, as the sun painted golden lines across the kennel, Jamie dozed off while reading. She woke to a soft weight on her foot, Zephyr curled up, head resting on her shoe, breathing slow and steady. For the first time, his trust felt complete, a gift more precious than any words could express. Jamie blinked back tears, not wanting to break the moment. Outside, children's laughter floated in from the yard. Inside, the world was safe, quiet, full of promise. Volunteers noticed the change, too. Zephyr began to greet them with a cautious wag, sometimes stepping out of his kennel to sniff an offered hand. Maggie, the teenager who'd drawn pictures for him, brought a homemade collar with his name embroidered in blue. Zephyr let her fasten it, standing tall for a brief second before ducking back to Jamie's side. Jamie watched him, pride swelling in her chest. "You're getting braver every day," she whispered, running a gentle hand down his back. "The world's still big and scary sometimes, but we've got each other, right?" As the days stretched into weeks, Zephyr's scars faded, leaving behind fur just a shade lighter than the rest. His eyes grew brighter, his steps more confident. There were still storms, thunder that rattled the windows, rain that sent him burrowing into blankets. But there was also sunlight, laughter, the slow return of joy. And for Jamie, every small step Zephyr took toward the sun was a step forward for herself too. A reminder that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments of trust, in acts of quiet courage, in the gentle warmth of two souls learning to hope again. The ocean had always been both a calling and a curse for Jamie Walker. Her earliest memories were of splashing in the surf, salt stinging her cheeks, her mother's laughter mingling with the gulls overhead. But ever since that stormy dawn when she pulled Zephyr from the waves, water had taken on new meaning, a test of courage, a wall between pain and healing. For Zephyr, it was an even higher wall, built of fear and memory, impossible to climb. Jamie knew, though, that real healing meant facing what hurt most. Together, she started small, with bowls of water in the shelter's sunlit yard, careful to keep her tone light and her movements slow. At first, Zephyr couldn't bear to look at it. His body stiffened, ears back, tail tucked so tight it nearly vanished. Jamie sat beside him, dipping her fingers in the water, letting droplets fall and glint in the sunlight. She never forced him, just let him watch, sometimes reaching over to scratch behind his ear or nudge a treat closer. Each day, she moved the bowl a little closer, celebrating every brave sniff, every hesitant glance. "We're just looking today, that's all," she'd say, as much to herself as to him. One day, when a cloudless sky made everything feel softer, Jamie brought a shallow tub and filled it with warm water. She knelt in the grass, hands resting on the rim. Zephyr watched from a few feet away, his breath quick and shallow. Jamie dipped her hand, swirling the water, humming a tune she barely remembered from childhood. Zephyr crept forward, body low, and Jamie felt her own heartbeat thud in time with his. He sniffed at the edge, stretched his neck, and for a fleeting second, dipped the tip of his paw into the water. He startled himself, jumping back, but Jamie clapped and grinned. "That's it. Good boy, Zephyr," she cheered, her voice carrying to the shelter windows. A couple of volunteers peeked out, smiling, and Zephyr's tail gave a tiny, uncertain wag. It was only a start, but Jamie felt hope growing. She'd heard from Maria that even the smallest victory meant the world to these animals. Sometimes healing is about celebrating the seconds, not the hours, Maria had told her, and Jamie had taken those words to heart. She marked Zephyr's milestones in her phone. First sniff, first touch, first lick of water, and looked for patterns in his fears. Thunderstorms, puddles, the hiss of a hose, all sent him running. But with Jamie at his side, he always found his way back to calm. Jamie wanted to push farther, but gently, always at Zephyr's pace. She talked with the shelter staff about taking him to the beach, the place of his greatest trauma, but also the place that had given him a second chance. "It's risky," Maria cautioned, worry creasing her brow. "But if you think he's ready, maybe seeing the ocean from a safe distance will help him start to reclaim it." Jamie agreed. She packed Zephyr's favorite blanket and a pouch of chicken treats, slipped his blue collar over his head, and loaded him gently into the truck. They arrived at dawn, the air cool, the sand still untouched by footprints. Jamie carried Zephyr from the parking lot, setting him down on a soft patch of dune grass, far from the surf. The waves rolled in, rhythmic and slow, their roar muffled by distance. Zephyr trembled, eyes wide, muscles tense beneath Jamie's hands. She sat beside him, her back to the water, letting him decide when or if he'd look. Minutes ticked by, the silence filled with nothing but the cry of distant gulls. Jamie laid the blue blanket on the sand and let Zephyr burrow into it, rubbing his nose and paws until he was calm enough to look up. She opened the treat pouch and set one beside his paw, humming quietly. "Just you and me, buddy. No rush." Eventually, curiosity beat out fear, and Zephyr raised his head, glancing at the sparkling blue just visible beyond the dunes. A jogger passed by, nodding hello. Zephyr shrank back, but didn't bolt. Jamie smiled, giving him another treat. She told him stories about the sea, about the people she'd rescued and the lives she'd seen change in the surf. "The ocean takes, but it gives back too," she whispered, not sure if she was talking to Zephyr or herself. As the sun rose higher, painting the sand gold, Zephyr took a few hesitant steps forward, sniffing at seaweed and shells. Jamie followed, always just behind, letting him set the pace. Finally, they reached the edge of the water. Zephyr froze, panic flickering in his eyes, body rigid with old memories. Jamie knelt beside him, fingers gentle as she stroked his neck. "It's okay," she murmured. "You're safe, I've got you." She dug her toes into the sand, modeling calm, and waited. A small wave lapped up, fizzing over Zephyr's paws. For a moment he quivered, uncertain. Jamie held her breath. Then, with a deep, shuddering sigh, Zephyr planted his feet and let the water touch him. He looked up at Jamie, unsure, seeking reassurance. Jamie laughed, tears springing to her eyes. "That's my brave boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ear as his tail gave a tentative wag. The breakthrough was small, but real. Jamie captured the moment on her phone. A picture of Zephyr's paw in the foam, ears perked, eyes full of cautious wonder. She sent it to Maria, who replied with a row of exclamation points and hearts. Later, back at the shelter, volunteers gathered around to watch the video. "He did it!" Maggie cheered. "He really did it!" Zephyr basked in the attention, confidence blooming with each gentle hand, each kind word. That night, a thunderstorm rattled the shelter windows. Zephyr panicked, burrowing under his blanket. But this time Jamie was there. She sat on the floor, humming softly, and after a while, Zephyr crawled out and pressed against her, seeking comfort instead of running away. Jamie wrapped her arms around him, whispering that storms always pass, that they'd face them together from now on. For both Jamie and Zephyr, facing the water became a symbol, a mark of resilience, of moving forward even when you're afraid. Each small step was a victory over the past, a promise of better days ahead. And as they walked back to the truck, Zephyr glanced over his shoulder at the waves, his tail just a little higher, his heart a little lighter, ready to try again tomorrow. Summer arrived with a heat that shimmered on the streets and set the beach alive with families, kites, and the smell of grilling corn. For Zephyr and Jamie, life settled into something like hope. Each morning, Jamie drove to the shelter, a mug of coffee in hand, Zephyr's blue blanket always draped across the passenger seat. They shared the slow, bright days with the shelter staff, celebrating each of Zephyr's little triumphs. A tail wag, a new sound explored, a hesitant splash in a shallow pool set up in the yard. To outsiders, these steps might seem tiny, but to Jamie, each was a miracle. But miracles, she knew, often came tangled up with setbacks. The first came on a humid afternoon, as thunderheads built out over the ocean. Jamie had just finished setting up for a Meet the Rescues event, a fundraising day with lemonade, games, and families strolling through the shelter. Zephyr stayed in the quiet room at the back, far from the crowds. Maria peeked in, smiling. "He seems calmer lately, don't you think?" Jamie nodded, watching Zephyr nose around a new, squeaky toy. Suddenly, a crack of thunder split the air, so loud it rattled the window panes. Zephyr bolted, claws scrabbling, eyes wide with terror. He dove under the cot, squeezing himself into a trembling, panting ball. Jamie dropped to the floor, heart pounding, whispering to him in the low, soothing tone she'd practiced for months. It took an hour for his shakes to subside, for his eyes to lose that haunted, far-away look. Jamie stayed the whole time, curled on the rug, her presence a silent promise. The storm outside faded, but the memory of it clung to them both. After the thunderstorm, Zephyr's progress faltered. He jumped at every loud noise. Even the whoosh of a closing door sent him skittering for cover. Jamie's patience was tested. She wanted so badly to fix everything, to wipe away every memory of pain. But she remembered Maria's words. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. Sometimes you have to walk through the same storm more than once. Instead of pushing, Jamie changed tactics. She started coming by in the evenings when the shelter was quiet and sitting by Zephyr's kennel as dusk settled over the yard. She spoke less, just sat in silence with him, sometimes reading, sometimes just listening to the chorus of crickets outside. Little by little, Zephyr's confidence crept back. He greeted her with a nose bump to her palm, then dared to trot outside, even as dusk darkened the sky. The next challenge came not from within, but from the world outside the shelter's walls. One Thursday, Maria called an emergency meeting with the staff and volunteers. "Our funding is running low," she admitted, voice weary. "If we can't raise more by the end of summer, we'll have to cut back. Fewer animals, fewer rescues, maybe even close our doors." Jamie looked around at the worried faces, her heart sinking. Brave Shelter was more than a building. It was a second chance for animals like Zephyr, and for people like her, too. Jamie made a decision that night. She took home an old camcorder from the lost and found bin and began filming Zephyr's story. She captured his cautious steps toward the ocean, his trembling but determined attempts to face the rain, the gentle way he pressed against her hand when he needed comfort. She spoke quietly to the camera, telling their story. He was thrown away by someone, but saved by a whole community. He's teaching me every day that fear isn't the end of the story. She edited the footage on her battered laptop, then uploaded the video to the shelter's social media page, tagging it, "Zephyr Strong." Within hours, the post started to spread. People shared stories of their own rescues, their own setbacks and small miracles. Donations ticked up, a few dollars at a time. The next week, a local news station came to film a segment on Zephyr, and soon strangers stopped by just to see the little German shepherd who had survived the sea. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Boxes of treats and toys arrived. Volunteers baked cookies and lemonade for another fundraiser, and a mural of Zephyr appeared on the shelter wall, painted by Maggie and her art class. For every setback, a new wave of kindness seemed to appear, buoying Jamie's spirits, reminding her that hope wasn't something you fought for alone. But the storms weren't over. One night, the sky opened with rain and lightning, thunder shaking the roof. Zephyr panicked, crawling under Jamie's bed at home, whining and pawing at the floorboards. Jamie slid under with him, her knees pressed to the cool wood, arms wrapped around his trembling body. She whispered old stories, sang lullabies, stroked his fur until his breathing slowed. When the storm finally passed, Jamie stayed curled beside him, refusing to let him face the darkness alone. After that night, something shifted. The next morning, Zephyr crept out from under the bed and nosed Jamie's hand, his tail wagging slow but certain. When they arrived at the shelter, he greeted the volunteers at the door, allowing a few gentle scratches behind his ears. Maggie cheered. "That's the bravest pup I know." Zephyr's eyes shone with shy pride. Zephyr's courage became a light for others. Kids from the local school came to visit, reading to the animals, telling Zephyr their own fears and hopes. Volunteers brought their own rescue pets to play in the yard. It was as if Zephyr's healing sparked something larger, a belief that second chances were possible, even after the worst storms. Jamie watched, awed by the quiet power of small miracles. Zephyr's story didn't erase the pain, but it gave meaning to every setback, every night spent whispering away fear. It reminded Jamie that hope was built, not from perfect days, but from facing darkness and choosing to try again. And as summer pressed on, the shelter full of laughter and possibility, Jamie and Zephyr faced each new challenge together. Undaunted, their bond stronger for every step taken through the storm. The final days of summer swelled Santa Cruz Beach with energy, the boardwalk thrumming with music, laughter, and the splash of waves against pylons. It was the weekend of the annual Ocean Fest, a day when families crowded the sand for races, kite flying, and the big lifeguard demonstration. For Jamie, this event always carried an edge of nostalgia and anxiety. It marked anniversaries of rescues both triumphant and tragic. This year, as she zipped her red lifeguard jacket and clipped her whistle around her neck, she glanced back at the shelter van parked by the dunes. Zephyr waited inside, nose pressed to the window, his blue bandana bright as sky. The shelter team had set up a booth at the far end of the boardwalk, decorated with photos of Zephyr and other rescue animals. Maria handed out flyers and answered questions, while Maggie, armed with a clipboard and sun hat, collected donations. Jamie waved as she passed, nerves twisting in her gut. She was scheduled to lead the final demonstration, and the crowd had already spilled onto the sand. The day was warm and clear, the sea alive with surfers and swimmers, kids chasing foam along the shore. Jamie scanned the waterline, old habits kicking in. Her team was ready, rescue boards stacked, radios checked. She found herself glancing back toward Zephyr, who had settled in the shade by the booth, a small hero hidden among the bustle. Suddenly, a scream cut through the noise. Sharp, high, terrified. Jamie's head snapped toward the surf, eyes locking on a spot far beyond the usual swimming boundary. There, a little girl in a neon-pink swimsuit was being dragged by a rip current, her arms flailing as each wave pulled her farther from shore. In an instant, years of training and instinct propelled Jamie forward. She grabbed a rescue board and sprinted, shouting orders to her team. The crowd parted, a hush sweeping over the festivities as people realized what was happening. Jamie's feet hit the water, her body cutting through the surf, the board slicing foam and salt. She counted every stroke, heart thundering, mind calculating distance and danger. But as she approached the break, she saw something she'd never expected. From the dunes, Zephyr broke free of his leash, bandana flapping. He barked, a sharp, insistent call, racing toward the water's edge, his eyes glued to Jamie. Maria tried to catch him, but Zephyr dodged, launching himself into the shallow surf. Jamie's breath caught, fear for him now tangled with her fear for the girl. Zephyr plunged into the water, body low and strong, barking urgently. His voice was different, commanding, not panicked. The crowd gasped, but Jamie saw determination in his every move. She reached the girl first, tossing her the rescue can, steadying her as she coughed and sputtered. The current was fierce, and the girl clung to Jamie's arm, wild-eyed with fear. Zephyr circled them, barking in short, sharp bursts, as if guiding Jamie through the roughest patch. He darted just ahead, then turned back, splashing and drawing their attention toward a path that cut sideways across the current, a way out Jamie herself might have missed in the chaos. Following his lead, Jamie shifted course, pulling the girl with her, trusting Zephyr's instincts. His presence seemed to calm the girl, who wrapped her other arm around his wet fur. Together, they reached the shallows, waves crashing behind them. Jamie carried the girl to dry sand, where her mother swept her up in tears. Zephyr shook himself, sending water everywhere, and then collapsed beside Jamie, sides heaving, eyes shining with pride and relief. A cheer rose from the crowd, wild, cathartic, filled with joy and disbelief. People surged forward, cell phones raised, voices blending in a chorus of gratitude and awe. Jamie knelt beside Zephyr, running trembling fingers through his soaked fur, laughing and crying all at once. "You saved us," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "You did it, Zephyr. You really did it." The beach patrol captain strode over, grinning. "That's some dog you've got there, Jamie. Never seen anything like it." Maria and Maggie rushed over, hugging Jamie and Zephyr, the little blue bandana now dark and dripping but worn like a medal. News spread quickly. A dog who had once been terrified of the ocean had braved the waves to help save a child. By the time the paramedics left and the crowd returned to their games, Zephyr was a celebrity. Children asked for pictures, parents thanked Jamie, and Maria wiped away tears as she updated the shelter's social media with a triumphant photo of Zephyr, bandana tied proudly. Jamie kneeling beside him, both of them beaming at the horizon. As the sun dropped low, casting gold across the sand, the lifeguard team gathered. The captain presented Zephyr with an honorary rescue dog award, a blue bandana freshly embroidered with his name, and a lifeguard badge. The crowd erupted in applause. Zephyr stood tall, tail wagging, soaking up the adoration. Jamie knelt by his side, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd done, what they'd become. Later, as the beach emptied and only the low roar of the waves remained, Jamie sat with Zephyr at the edge of the boardwalk. She let the sea breeze tangle her hair, her hand resting on Zephyr's back. "You turned your greatest fear into your greatest gift," she murmured, voice thick with emotion. Zephyr leaned into her side, eyes half closed, content and utterly at peace. Their journey was far from over. Scars still lingered, storms would come again. But tonight, they sat in the afterglow of a miracle, knowing they'd changed not just their own story, but the stories of everyone who witnessed courage born from pain. The tide had turned, and with it, the promise of new beginnings. The beach was quiet again, the crowds long gone, the boardwalk empty except for the echoes of laughter and the distant rattle of a snack cart being wheeled away. Jamie found herself sitting by the bonfire pit, legs stretched out on the cooling sand, Zephyr's head resting heavily on her knee. The sun had dipped low, painting the waves in strokes of orange and indigo, casting long shadows that blurred the boundary between land and water. Jamie breathed in the tang of salt and smoke, feeling a peace she hadn't known in years. All around them, the signs of the day lingered. The lifeguard captain's whistle left hanging on a post, a forgotten sand bucket, Zephyr's new blue bandana tied proudly around his neck. The beach had become a place of healing, a far cry from the terrifying storm-swept coast where Jamie had first found him. Now, with every gentle wave, It felt as if the world itself was exhaling, releasing old pain and welcoming in something new. Jamie stroked Zephyr's ears, feeling the steady warmth of his breath, the rhythm of his heart echoing against her palm. She thought back over the months they'd spent together, the sleepless nights and tiny victories, the setbacks and sudden leaps forward, the way Zephyr's courage seemed to multiply, inspiring not just Jamie, but everyone who crossed his path. She realized that just as Zephyr had faced the water, she too had confronted her deepest fears, not all at once, but step by step, letting hope in through the smallest cracks. Maria and a few volunteers joined them at the fire, passing around mugs of cocoa and stories of the day. Zephyr curled closer to Jamie as she listened to Maria talk about the shelter's full donation jar, the new mural, the phone calls pouring in from people wanting to adopt or volunteer. The community, it seemed, had been waiting for a story like Zephyr's, a story about starting over, about finding strength in weakness, about the power of gentle persistence. Jamie's gaze drifted to Zephyr's profile in the flickering firelight. He still startled at sudden noises. He still needed his blue blanket on stormy nights. His scars, both inside and out, would never fully disappear. But they had faded, softened, woven into the fabric of who he was becoming. He was not fixed, not cured, but something far more real, a survivor, proof that wounds could be carried with dignity, that healing was possible without erasing the past. She thought about resilience, about how easy it was to believe that healing was a straight line, an end goal. But Zephyr had taught her that healing was slow, fragile, unpredictable, a process more like a breeze than a storm. Sometimes it vanished for days, only to return in a moment of sunlight, a wag of a tail, a quiet night by the fire. Zephyr's victories were measured in puddles crossed, hands trusted, comfort found during thunder, and, for the first time in his life, a joyful plunge into the ocean. Each step mattered. Every small win was a testament to hope, a proof that patience and kindness could transform the world, one moment at a time. As Jamie sipped her cocoa, Maggie joined her, sketchbook in hand. She flipped through new drawings, Zephyr leading a parade, Zephyr curled up with Jamie on the beach, Zephyr facing the waves head-on. "He's a hero," Maggie said softly, not looking up. "He made me think. Maybe I could be brave too." Jamie's throat tightened with gratitude. She had seen it over and over, Zephyr's courage echoing outward, touching children who'd been bullied, adults struggling with loss, even volunteers learning to open up about their own broken places. The fire crackled, sparks rising into the night. Jamie leaned back, watching Zephyr doze, the glow from the flames tracing a golden line along his muzzle. She realized how much she owed him, not just for the second chance he'd given her as a lifeguard, but for showing her what real bravery looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward with fear as a companion. Not grand gestures, but the stubborn, beautiful refusal to give up. Maria raised her mug, toasting the group. To Zephyr and to every animal and person who's ever needed a little more time. Around the circle, heads nodded, smiles blooming. Jamie caught Zephyr's gaze, soft, trusting, no longer haunted, and felt a rush of pride. Jamie knew there would be hard days ahead. The storms would return, fears would flare up, both for Zephyr and for herself. But now, she had learned to look for the breeze after the storm, the small signs that life was changing, that hearts could mend, that even the deepest wounds could be carried, not hidden. She saw it in every person who volunteered, in every animal who found a new home, in every story of hope sent to the shelter's inbox. It was in the laughter of children, the thanks of strangers, the warmth of a dog curled against her side. The wind shifted, carrying a hint of rain. Jamie drew Zephyr close, burying her face in his fur. She whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "You saved me too, you know." Zephyr nudged her hand, sighing, eyes fluttering closed. Above them, the stars winked out one by one behind the clouds, and Jamie closed her eyes, trusting that dawn would come again. They had both learned that life wasn't about being unafraid. It was about facing the world together. One step, one breath, one breeze at a time. In the glow of the dying fire, surrounded by friends and the quiet hush of the sea, Jamie felt, for the first time in a long while, not just hope, but peace. Zephyr was home, and so was she. Zephyr's legend grew in the weeks after Ocean Fest. The little German shepherd who once trembled at the sound of rain was now the face of hope for the entire town. Photos of his rescue, his blue bandana, and his determined eyes filled the windows of Brave Shelter, pinned to bulletin boards at coffee shops, and even painted onto a new mural outside the fire station. It seemed everyone in Santa Cruz had heard his story, how he had survived the storm, braved the waves, and saved a little girl from the sea. Jamie watched the ripple effect with quiet awe. Every morning, when she opened her front door, she'd find notes left by neighbors, crayon drawings from children, thank you cards with crooked dog paws stamped in paint, little envelopes of cash marked for Zephyr's friends. Sometimes, strangers stopped her on the boardwalk just to shake her hand, tears in their eyes as they recounted what Zephyr's courage had meant to them. The old man who ran the hardware store pressed a leash into her hand. "For a true hero," he said, grinning shyly. Even the stern police chief started bringing treats to the shelter, waving off his reputation with a sheepish smile. Brave Shelter itself changed, too. People came from miles around, bringing toys, food, and donations, more than Maria had ever seen. There were new volunteers every week. High schoolers eager to walk the dogs, retirees willing to fix the broken fence or repaint kennels, families who just wanted to sit and read to nervous animals. The story of Zephyr's survival became a rallying cry. The shelter's fundraiser, which Jamie had once worried would fail, surpassed its goal in a matter of days. Maria wiped tears from her eyes as she told Jamie, "It's not just the money. It's the way people believe now. In us. In second chances." Jamie found herself speaking to local schools, sharing Zephyr's journey with classrooms full of wide-eyed children. She told them about fear, about healing, about not giving up when things got hard. She explained how Zephyr wasn't magically cured overnight, how he still flinched at thunder and slept with his blue blanket close. "But every time he tries," Jamie said, "he gets a little bit braver, and so can you." Kids lined up afterward, some clutching stuffed animals, others shyly asking if they could visit Zephyr at the shelter. Maggie, the budding artist, presented Jamie with a new portrait. Zephyr standing tall on the beach, lifeguard badge gleaming. For Jamie, these school visits brought her own lessons. She watched children light up with hope, listened to their stories of scraped knees, lost pets, parents who sometimes yelled too much. She realized that Zephyr's greatest gift wasn't his dramatic rescue, but the way he inspired others to face their own storms, no matter how small. But it wasn't just children who found courage in Zephyr's journey. The shelter's phone rang daily with calls from people who wanted to adopt animals with baggage, the ones usually left behind. "I saw Zephyr on the news," a woman's voice cracked, and I think maybe I'm ready for a dog who needs a little extra love." The adoption board filled up. Elderly cats found homes, shy dogs were chosen first, and even a grumpy old parrot named Murphy finally got a second chance. Jamie noticed the shift in herself, too. The guilt and regret she'd carried since that failed rescue years before began to soften, replaced by a steady gratitude. Caring for Zephyr, watching him learn to trust, had taught her that healing took a village. She couldn't have done it alone. It was Maria's steady wisdom, Maggie's art, the kindness of strangers, the quiet patience of other volunteers. Every person who had donated, sat quietly, or believed in second chances had shaped Zephyr's story, and hers as well. It was this sense of community that gave Jamie a new purpose. She started speaking out for better animal welfare laws at city council meetings, advocating for stricter penalties for abuse and more funding for shelters. She told Zephyr's story everywhere she could, on radio shows, in interviews, at rescue events. Her voice, once hesitant, grew strong. "We owe it to every animal, every person who's been left behind, to fight for them," she said. "Don't turn away from someone who's struggling. Your kindness might be the lifeline they need." The town embraced Zephyr as their mascot of resilience and hope. When the shelter organized its first rescue parade, Zephyr led the way, blue bandana gleaming, Jamie at his side. Dogs in costumes pranced down the boardwalk, children waved homemade banners, and the air rang with laughter and applause. Zephyr walked proudly, tail high, stopping often to greet old friends and new fans alike. That afternoon, as the parade wound down and families drifted home, Jamie lingered by the water's edge with Zephyr. She watched him chase gulls along the shoreline, his movements free and joyful. He stopped to sniff at a tide pool, barking at a crab that scuttled by, and Jamie laughed, her heart light. Her spirit healed in ways she'd never thought possible. She knelt beside him, hand in his fur, and whispered, "You showed us all how to fight for hope, how to never give up, no matter how big the storm." Zephyr nudged her chin, tongue lolling, eyes shining with the certainty of belonging. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Jamie looked back at the town, lights twinkling, the mural glowing, the shelter safe and alive. She knew that Zephyr's story would ripple outward for years to come, reminding everyone that rescue was never a solo act, that healing was a mosaic built by countless caring hands. In the gentle hush of evening, surrounded by a community forever changed, Jamie realized that second chances weren't just for the lost and the broken. They were for everyone. And sometimes, all it took was the courage of one small dog to remind an entire town how to believe again. Sunset lingered over Santa Cruz, the last rays painting the ocean in hues of fire and rose. The day's heat faded to a soft coolness, and the world seemed to hold its breath as the sky deepened and the first evening stars pricked through the twilight. On the sand, Jamie sat cross-legged beside a small driftwood fire. Zephyr curled up at her side, his blue bandana faded but clean, his ears twitching in the evening breeze. The beach was quieter now, laughter and footsteps muffled by distance, only the sound of waves and the soft hush of wind filling the air. Jamie watched Zephyr sleep, his body relaxed in a way she had only dreamed possible on that first day. His nose twitched as he dreamed, paws moving in little circles, chasing memories she hoped were now mostly sweet. Around them, the embers glowed low and warm, lighting Jamie's face as she pulled out her phone and set it up on a driftwood log, framing herself and Zephyr in the shot. She hesitated before hitting record, not because she was nervous, but because she wanted to get this moment right. So much had changed. So many battles fought and won, setbacks faced together, and now a peace that felt earned, not given. She pressed record, took a steadying breath, and began to speak, her voice soft but strong, the crackle of the fire underscoring her words. "Hey everyone," she started, glancing down at Zephyr with a gentle smile. "I wanted to share something with you tonight. Something I wish I'd heard a long time ago. Maybe something you need to hear too." She spoke not just to the community, but to every person who had felt lost, afraid, or broken. She told the story of Zephyr, how he had arrived in her life clinging to a board, soaked and shivering, his body marked by ropes and fear. She spoke of the sleepless nights, the setbacks, the small miracles that had carried them forward, a wag of the tail, a hesitant step toward the water, the first time Zephyr slept with his head on her shoe. She described the parade, the thunderstorm nights, the laughter and tears that had changed her too. "Sometimes," Jamie said, her voice catching as she stroked Zephyr's fur, "the smallest survivor can teach us the biggest lessons." Zephyr reminded me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about moving forward, one step, one breeze at a time. Healing takes time. It's not a straight path. There will be days you feel like you're back at the start. But every act of kindness, every small victory, matters more than you know. She paused, listening to the hush around her, watching the gentle rise and fall of Zephyr's chest. She thought of all the people and animals whose stories had intertwined with theirs. The volunteers, the children, the strangers who became friends. She remembered the way the community had rallied, how each person's little bit of hope had built something bigger than fear. The mural on the fire station, the crowded adoption board, the stacks of thank you cards, reminders that change was possible, that one story could spark hundreds more. Jamie leaned into the camera, her expression earnest. "If this story touched you," she said, "I hope you'll share your own. Maybe you've rescued someone, or maybe you're the one waiting to be rescued. Maybe you're somewhere in the middle, wondering if you'll ever feel whole again. You're not alone. Write your story in the comments. Leave a word for someone who might need it. Like subscribe or just share a little hope tonight. Your voice, just like Zephyr's, might be the fresh air someone's waiting for." As the recording ended, Jamie wiped her eyes, not with sadness, but with gratitude. She looked down at Zephyr, who was now awake, gazing at her with those deep, steady eyes that had carried her through so many storms. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the weight of the journey they'd shared. Later, children ran along the beach, their laughter echoing in the fading light. Zephyr leapt up, tail wagging, joining their game as Jamie watched from the fire. She saw Maria waving from the shelter's porch, Maggie chasing a stray kite, and parents sharing stories while the dogs played in the surf. For a long moment, Jamie let herself soak in the peace, the knowledge that, for once, everything was exactly as it should be. She reflected on the lessons Zephyr had given her, the ones she hoped would ripple outward with every retelling of his story. She thought of resilience, the way life could break you and still offer you another chance, if only you reached for it. She remembered how hope could come when you least expected it, in the form of a frightened puppy, a gentle word, a new sunrise. She thought, too, of the power of small steps, how every act of trust, every moment spent comforting Zephyr through his fear, had added up to something unbreakable. How little victories, seeking comfort in a thunderstorm, stepping into the surf, greeting a new friend, were the building blocks of healing. and she saw, finally, how she and Zephyr had healed together, each teaching the other about patience, trust, and the quiet strength found in refusing to give up. The stars came out, one by one, brighter and clearer than Jamie could remember in years. She sat by the fire with Zephyr pressed close, her heart calm, her mind at rest. The old pain hadn't vanished, but it had found its place, woven into a bigger story, one where joy and sorrow lived side by side. As the night deepened, Jamie packed away her phone, her blanket, her memories of the storm. She looked at Zephyr, who gazed up with a dog's infinite faith. "Let's go home," she whispered, rising with him and walking together across the sand. Behind them, the waves smoothed their footprints, the breeze stirring a promise in the air. Because some stories never really end. They echo in the hearts of those who hear them. They breathe hope into dark places, and they remind us, again and again, that even after the worst storms, the breeze always returns. Thank you for trusting me with Zephyr's journey. Let me know if you need a final summary, a short conclusion, or want to share this story with your audience.